And we are live.
Hey, everybody.
Hello, hello.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon.
This is the bit in the show where people are like beginning to take their seats. So there's rarely someone in the audience at this point, but they're shuffling in and they've got their popcorn and they're like their drinks.
The lights have flickered once or twice to signal to everybody to get to your seat. Yeah.
You get the little bell out by the bar.
Yeah.
People, if you can please finish your drinks, thank you.
Dun, dun, dun.
Actually, that's more like me getting ready for the show, where because it's like it's 7 p.m. here, so I'm like wolfing down dinner.
I should run over to your house at like 6:45, Rory, and just sort of like knock on the door, like 15 minutes, Mr. O'Connor, 15 minutes, and then like run back here, just make it in time.
That would be great.
I just have this picture of Scooter from the Muppets. 15 minutes to curtain call, Mr. O'Connor. 15 minutes to curtain call.
Oh no, a big thing has fallen on top of Michael. Oh no, I am Michael. I don't know. Who freaking knows?
Speaking of Muppets, all of the Muppets are on Disney Plus, and I just got my family to watch one the other day. And I don't think Zoe had ever really sat and watched a whole episode. It was so delightful. It was great.
It's kind of weird because we started on the first one, which I don't think is ever a great idea because they're rarely the strongest. But I was saying, Neve, my eldest daughter, is like a big musical fan, and I was into her. Like most of my knowledge of musical songs comes from the Muppet Show. So when I'm hearing the song, I'm like seeing the Muppets performing it, and they're kind of humorous twist on the whole thing. But they taught a generation, like because they were really capturing that whole musical vibe, in a more modern way. But the certain songs, like For What It's Worth, I was saying this to Michael, I can't help but see these hunters going through the forest with guns and the animals, like the bears and the deer, and all singing that song by Buffalo Springfield.
That is awesome.
We have mentioned my favorite one as well, Tony, which is there's a performance of Kenny Rogers, the gambler. So gotta know when to hold 'em. But it's in like a train car. And it's like a guy singing it. Well, it's Kenny Rogers singing it, and a Muppet, and the Muppet dies, and his ghost comes out at the end of it, and it's sort of like, whoa, Muppet ghosts! This is bleak, but also amazing. I'm a huge fan. What's your favorite like performance from the Muppets? What's sort of like your go-to?
I think since it's been so long since I've actually watched a good chunk of them, I think there are two just sort of emblazoned, maybe three emblazoned memories that I have of the Muppets. First and foremost, Phenomena. Phenomena. So that's definitely one. And we watched that one with Zoe. And she's like, oh, I've heard this. Yeah, this is exactly where it came from. Yeah. So that, and then Animal going wild on the drums for any song, and then Swedish Chef. So those are sort of like my key memories. As far as musical performances, I don't know. I think I have to go back and browse the catalog to really remember some. I see Alice Cooper, Welcome to My Nightmare, as a recommendation there. So I think Zoe will be coming home again next weekend, so maybe when she's here, I'll browse the list and we'll pick a couple and we'll watch them, and just even browsing the list, I'll probably have the memory of oh yes, I remember this.
Yeah. So. For me, I grew up with our family got the Muppet Show cast album, which was like I think it was double LP of like the best bits from I think it was like the first or second season of it. But it's just like hilarious. It's got so many great tunes on it. But then for my birthday, when I would have been about 6 or 7, I think, I got the Muppet movie soundtrack. And that makes me tear up. Like whenever I hear like Rainbow Connection or It's Not Easy Being Green. As a little child going, you understand me?
Yes. Kermit gets me.
Mike says Muppets Bohemian Rhapsody wins hands down. I'm entirely down with that.
Yeah.
Steph's favorite. Tony, I don't think you met my partner Steph, but Steph has a huge love for Muppets. But their favorite one is Elton John doing Crocodile Rock, because it's full 1970s
Yes.
sequin explosion Elton, but it's the rocks and all of the monsters and all of the animals going
Yeah.
and it's just like, holy crap, everything about this is wholesome as heck. It's great. Even though Elton is invariably on a whole load of coke, and it's like
Well, I actually watched Rocket Man at the weekend.
Oh, did you?
And it is amazing. Well, I loved it.
It is.
Just the direction, the acting, and that moment when they play Crocodile Rock, because it really captures the feeling of each song and weaves them into the narrative that's being told. And yeah, watching him perform Crocodile Rock is just I don't know if ecstatic isn't quite the right word, but it elevates you, which is literally what happens in the performance.
In the movie.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I mean, I only discovered that, and this was through a quiz that I was watching a couple of days ago, that Taron Egerton, who played him, does a duet on the soundtrack with Elton John. And it's
oh,
wow.
wow.
So it's two Eltons coming together to perform the power of Elton squared.
So cool.
Super, super cool. I met Elton John once at Watford. Super lovely.
Did you?
Yeah. He
was at a match?
Yeah. I was working in the press box, and he was just messing around, being Elton John at Vicarage Road. Very weird.
This is completely off topic, but I love, between him and Freddie Mercury. So we watched Bohemian Rhapsody as well, a week or two before. And just as both performers, they come from such kind of humble backgrounds, and and with Elton John, a pretty rough one as well, devoid of, I think, love and affection. But it's really weird because they're two such down to earth characters that we only see them as the kind of superstars that they've become. And there's some great moments in Rocket Man where they're their agent is would you ever just go out and spend some money? because they're still the two, himself and his writing partner, are just living at home with their parents.
Well, that's it, man. I guess you come up with nothing. It's sort of you start, you worry that you're going to go back to it. So
yeah.
And then he obviously cracked and just went, all right, £2.5 million on flowers this year. Let's make it happen, kids. Yoss has another Muppets recommendation. Reed Moreno's version of Fever with Animal on the drums.
I was trying to think of that. That's in the first episode, in episode 1.
Oh, really? Oh, cool. Ken says, I like that Michael is hiding who the champion is. Okay, number one, Ken, the champion is on my channel, not on this channel. And also the champion is not you, it's Yoda. So, done. You can challenge for it again tomorrow. This is a different stream. So yeah, has anybody actually been playing anything, doing anything? We're all in the games industry. Have we actually managed to play anything this week? Tony, have you managed to hit anything? Not even this week, recently.
So we have a morning ritual, and when I say we, it's my wife and I. So little mini tangent, one of the silver linings of this COVID lockdown mess is that I have spent more time with my wife in the last year than we have collectively, essentially, prior to that. And we've known each other for 30 years next week. And so it's been an amazing joy because we've gotten to actually, work on some projects together and spend some quality time together, walks and hikes and all that stuff. And we have a morning ritual where we have breakfast and we play a game. But my wife isn't necessarily a gamer. She likes more social games or some of the classics. So the games that we play pretty regularly, one of them is a variant off of backgammon. It's a game called AC Doocy. And it uses the backgammon board where you start with your checkers off the board. You draft them into your quadrant. Once they're all drafted in, then you march them all the way around to your opponent's home base. And once they're all in there, then you start drafting them off. And there's some variations on the doubles and the AC Doocy, which is a 1 and a 2. But that's a game that we play almost every day. We love dice games, so we've been playing a lot of Yahtzee, Pass the Pigs, and Quicks. Quicks has been a huge favorite in the family. We've gotten our kids to play. We've gotten some other family members to play. That's a great one to play over Zoom, too, because as long as everybody has a set of dice and the score pads, just rotate turns, and then everybody gets a chance to engage. So that's been really fun. We played, I just see Second Chance. Second Chance is a game we've played quite a bit. That one's really fun.
That's cool, yeah. Yoss was doing we played on our stream a couple of times. And Yoss was doing it for Microsoft Teams at work. That's really cool. Yeah.
We've also been playing with our daughter. I think we're in year 6 of Hogwarts Battle. So I'm playing that with my wife and our youngest, Zoe, and that's been really fun. We've been playing it essentially throughout the year, and so when Zoe comes back over spring break, we're going to take a road trip together as a family and go do lockdown somewhere else. But we're going to that game will be one of the games that comes with us, so we can get it back to the table. And then we play our own version of Strike, with just like a plastic colander and a bunch of D6 dice. And so that's a
not
blast.
The official Arena of Champions.
No, but I do want to get the Arena of Champions because there's really nothing like that bouncy platform. And then what's the other one that we played? Oh, Gin Rummy. Deck of cards and Gin Rummy.
Classic.
And a game we played all month, every single day last month, is the Minimalist game, which is a completely different type of game. Where
I've been following you doing this on Facebook.
So starting with day 1 of February, we each chose one item to let go of from our lives that's no longer serving us. And then day 2, we chose 2 items each. Day 3, 3 items each, all the way through the month. So that by the end of the month, we each gave away 406 items. And that was a blast. We inspired my dad and stepmom to participate, my mom to participate. And now I know a bunch of other people who are doing it. And the great thing about it is it hasn't stopped. And actually, we had been doing it already prior to that. And it's a game, they call it a game to sort of challenge you to participate in it.
Yeah.
But at the in our life does no longer serve us. And then allowing us to say goodbye to it, which is great because there's, as an artist and a pack rat, you can imagine what my garage looks like.
Right. I'm just going to cover.
Yeah. Shh. Nothing to see here anywhere.
Yeah. So, but there's a number of games that I've been trying to get to the table that hopefully they'll come back to the table. We did play Terra, the game from Hook. And what was another one we just played recently? Oh, there's a game from a UK team called Mr. and Mrs. based off of a TV game show.
Yeah.
And so we're wanting to call the game
they
and them because, it's a little more inclusive that way. But there's one element of it where you're just trying to hold up the card as to which of the two of you think is more likely to be the one to do or respond more to the question. So that one has been getting some traction with our kids. They really love that. So
excellent.
Nothing super deep as of late.
That's cool. It's interesting because a lot of people when we have them on, they will talk of the the games that they're playing, and you can pretty much guarantee that the games they'll talk about, oh yeah, we've been playing, Catan, and we've been playing this. But it's lovely to hear that a lot of the classics are hitting your table. The fact that you're playing random backgammon, modification makes me absolutely filled with joy because it's been a hot minute since I played backgammon, and I would love to start playing that again.
Yeah.
So good. So good.
That and
Also, you
Can't
get-
Stop. Can't Stop's been coming to the table quite a bit
Mhm.
too.
Cool. You got your first compliment of the
Oh,
show.
thanks, Peter.
What
Nice
a
to see you
nice
here.
guest.
But hang on, but he never comes on and says that about either of us, Michael. He only
Yeah,
ever
we're not
does it about the
guests.
guests.
Yeah, we're not guests. It's just sort of like, no. The two hosts are absolutely trash, but the guests are all good, so it's fine.
I'm only here for the guests.
Yeah, that's right.
How about you
What
guys?
have you been up
What have you
to,
guys
Rory?
been playing?
I have not been playing, I think, since we last spoke. I mean, well, we've been playtesting Prism Arena, some new Mocon for that, and I have been generating D&D characters because I am going. John, co-designer on Untold, was telling me how he has found this way of combining D&D and Untold together, and he said this is like my perfect role-playing game.
Wow.
He said it gives me everything I want, with like none of the fluff, and so I want to share that with a wider audience, but I need to kind of play it and do it myself first because he knows D&D. He's played it for years, whereas I've never really I haven't played it properly really since I was teens, early 20s. So I kind of need to get back into it. So the first step was generating some characters for it. So I was trying to go through that because it's not a straightforward process, creating characters for D&D. And I'm also, just to make my life harder, there's a zine that was published that kind of opened up the idea of race, and changed it to ancestry and culture. So it's to get away from the idea of racial traits being associated with characters. So I have like a gnome that was brought up in a dwarvish culture, so they have like a better constitution because they've obviously kind of working out more down in the mines than if they had been growing up in a kind of, a gnomish community. And I have a human, kind of half human, half orc, so ancestry, who's grown up in a human setting, and then I've got like a full orc who's grown up in a human setting as well. And I just love, as I'm creating the characters, I'm all of these like stories and narratives are spinning off as I'm picking spells, and so it's like I could just sit and do that and never actually play the game. I'd just be happy to kind of like spin the characters. So I've got my 4 characters ready, which is how John played, and that's like the first thing where I'm not playing with 4 characters. That's just way too much mental overload, mental load. So I'll have to try and do it with like 1 and a companion probably, and see how that goes. So I'll play it myself, get the feel for it, and then probably do a live stream or something showing how it works. But I love how quickly the characters level up. The concept where essentially, like John is just so good at tying things together, and the way he's woven the D&D leveling up into how he's playing it in Untold is really seamless. And I love that approach. So I'm kind of looking forward to doing it, and hopefully it'll get me the kind of experience with the 5th edition rules then to make it easier for me to run the game, because I always have this like horrible feeling of like flicking through books and manuals, and because I was saying that's my main thing. I was saying like Untold is so fluid, and I said, but I can't imagine doing it with D&D. I said, like, do you stop to look up the characters and generate the encounters? And he's like, oh yeah, like I'm totally indulging myself in how I do this. You don't play this for the fast experience. That's why you play Untold. This is like you get to explore the rule books and introduce the things that you don't normally get to see. I was like, oh, okay. Because if that was meant to be a fast game, I'm like, it wouldn't be happening with me. So, yeah, looking forward to doing what I do well with John, which is kind of go like, you've got, the stuff now. Let's make it really accessible for other people to do it.
That's really cool. Peter has confirmed that, he's only complimenting the guests because he likes the guests. So thanks, mate. Cheers. You've been doing some painting as well, Rory, I see, as well.
Yes, actually, and I'm kind of stretching myself. So I was painting some figures, and because it was International Women's Day, I decided to focus on the Onabugisha, which are they were the kind of female warriors and family that would actually protect a household when other people were away. So they were fully trained, and some of them did actually fight it, go out and actually fight in the battles, but they were largely like a defensive force. And yeah, it's what kind of drew me to Test of Honor, the fact that I could play pretty cool female, like I could field a full female force if I wanted, but I love mixing them together. And so I was practicing like detailing on figures, because the whole thing in the Japanese clothing is there's always little patterns, and I swore I'm going to keep it simple. I'm just going to do block colors, and then I'm like, oh, these people are doing such nice stuff. So I gave it a go, and yeah, I'm pretty happy, but I'm going to have to like dry brush it now. And this is the point where I worry that I'm going to ruin everything at that point. But yeah, I've been painting as well.
Cool.
So what about you, Michael? What have you been up to?
Not playing a lot, but a lot of organizing and sorting. You will see behind me, my Marvel Champions collection has now been completely sorted out. So yeah, we, like both Rory and I, we basically have everything in Marvel Champions. So yeah, I've put under your direction, I've put all of the hero stuff into the base box, and all of the villain stuff and the scenarios and stuff into the Red Skull box. And yeah, it's nice to have that sort of like much more organized. Okay, I'd like to do this and this and this and this, as opposed to having everything in like 300 different bags and like just fistering through everything and trying to get everything. It also made me realize that, good Lord, there's a lot of game there. And I've got to get off my butt, I think, and start doing a bit more, just like a bit more solo play. I might do some streams of that over on my own channel in a bit over the coming weeks. I also got this in the mail earlier in the week, Blatter Rauschen from the folks at Cosmos. So it's a very simple roll and write. Translates to falling leaves, I believe. But what's really nice about it, not just sort of like from a simple rules point of view, but I don't know if you'll be able to see this on the camera. You see how there are 4 different color sheets? They represent 4 different seasons. So you've got spring, summer, autumn, and winter, and the game plays differently depending on what season you play. That's cool. So it's a nice sort of like evolution on the old roll and write thing. But yeah, that was like a $5 from Amazon, because apparently there's a load of German language product stuck in UK Amazon that they can't shift back to Germany because it's incredibly expensive because of Brexit. So they're just trying to sell it all very, very cheaply. Some things will ship to Belfast. Some things won't. So it's kind of a bit of a crapshoot to see which ones will show up and which ones won't. But yeah, that is what I did. So £5.64. Very happy. Thank you very much.
Nice.
And yeah, just been working on some weird and wonderful stuff. I started my white whale of a game. I finally started working on my Eurovision game, and I'm making a Euro game about Eurovision, and it's going to be beautiful. So beautiful. And that's it. All right. So we should probably go into topics. So before we do that, though, as we are pretty bad at it, as we invariably manage to talk about things, Tony, do you want to give us the rundown on you? Who are you, and why are you here?
Wow, that's like such a big question.
I know, it's very philosophical vibe.
It kind of fits into the theme.
Well, I am here in this hangout primarily because of our connection through the game industry. I work for the Op, otherwise known as USAopoly. My role there is as the director of inventor relations, as well as the director of international sales for localizations. So my wonderful job is to meet with creative designers from around the world and hear game pitches with the hopes of bringing a multitude of those in for evaluation and potentially licensing, as well as finding international partners to publish some of the titles that we have rights to publish internationally. And that's allowed me the opportunity to meet some wonderful folks such as you guys and travel the world to really help find and share, what we do. So I feel very blessed to have a job that I love and a job that allows me the opportunity to connect with so many amazingly creative and wonderful people around the world.
So I don't normally ask this, but it kind of struck me, like, was working with USAopoly at the time your first kind of job in the games industry?
Yes, actually. So my undergraduate degree is in fine arts and have an emphasis in photography and graphic design. And right out of school, I had been working at a natural foods grocery local to Boulder, Colorado, where I went to college. Right out of college, I had an opportunity to go full time. And at that moment, it was nowhere near connected to my degree, but it offered, benefits. It had like full-time salary, health insurance, stock options. Like these are things like, at some point in a career level, you're like, wow, those things would probably be good to have. And it was a natural part of my life anyway. Like if I wasn't working there, I would be spending my time and money there anyway, because I eat a pretty mostly vegetarian diet. So, and a lot of organic foods and, supplements and such. So those were places I had a community already. So to be working in that environment while in school felt very natural. And so to get an opportunity to work in that environment right out of school also felt very natural. The drawback is I wasn't then using the degree in which I just got from school. But it also afforded us the opportunity to move from Colorado to California. And had we had the chance to move anywhere, we're like, if I go into this management training program with Wild Oats, if we move, it only makes sense to move to Southern California, which is where my wife's whole entire family is then eventually settled, because then we could have a family with kids that would grow up near cousins, which is something we both would have loved personally. So I had an opportunity to move to Orange County and worked in managing a store up in Mission Viejo. And it was crazy. Like our daughter Fiona at the time was, when we moved, like a year old, so I was spending 60, 70, 80 hours a week managing the team in the store. And it was like, I at the time was pretty young. I was 28 years old, and I came from, the home office, stores, and base of the company. And at the time, I don't know how many hundreds of stores we had throughout the country. But I was this young kid to all these people who had already been operating in the store. And I was stepping into essentially a dysfunctional family at the time. And they're like, who is this young kid thinking he is coming in here telling us what to do? And it was a challenging time for that store specifically, because where it was located, from a psychodemographic perspective, like there's a large portion of the public that was really interested in investing in their kids' health, investing in their own health. A lot of Olympic participants and athletes come from the Orange County, Mission Viejo area. So there's a lot of interest in health, but the store's location and the inability to spend a lot of money on marketing made it very challenging for the store to succeed. We had some amazing success within the store because of the community, but just the volume of traffic and the size of the store that just weren't matching up. So I was at that time I think the third general manager. And then because the store wasn't performing, I was the one taking the fall. So I was let go after a year. The store went through 2 more GMs, and they eventually closed the store because of the challenges that was just inherent with the store. So when that happened, we decided, well, let's move closer to Kelly's family. So we moved down to San Diego. She got a job working for the Women's Resource Center as a counselor and transitional housing counselor, which is amazing. My wife is a social worker and counselor. And so it was her chance to really start working in an environment professionally. She had been, as we moved, she was staying home as a full-time mom. And so this was her chance to start working. And so we were moving down here without a job, and I was introduced to USAopoly because her dad was actually doing some business consulting with the brother-sister team who owned the company, and he introduced me to the graphics department manager at the time, who was in need essentially of a production assistant, which essentially means anything and everything that needs to happen in the graphics department and on the production of designing and laying out the games. And at that time, it was just Monopoly games, and it was just city and state editions with just beginning to dabble in the licensing realm. And so he and I went to lunch. We had a good chat. We hit it off. Felt pretty connected, and he hired me, and that was in 1998. And he's still there. He's the VP of creative and production, and I've had a chance to wear a multitude of hats through my 23 years now, actually, but they've all been at USAopoly. And so for me, I have also grown up a lot in the industry, both as a graphic designer, because I also got to evolve within that space. I started to get to use my degree, which was amazing. But then as we began to dabble in licensing and grow into licensing and become more of a licensing company at the start, more so than a game company, because we were partnering a known game brand with an IP or an entertainment property that people were fans of. We were delivering, essentially these great licensing products to fans of said IP, but it was really having the platform and the opportunity to delve deeper into, what this one little sliver of the game industry that was just like then explosive into what it could become, and essentially where we're at now, which is pretty amazing to feel pretty connected to that process of helping to be one of the team members to go from where we were to where we are and where we're going. Yeah.
And I think that you kind of reminded me of something. I knew there was something I wanted to talk to you about as well. And you've kind of hit it. Like USAopoly and now I think more so, well, even more so the OP, you work mostly with licensed games. And I think we were talking about this yesterday with some of the team about the power of that combination to bring people into gaming. Like I know quite often licensed games got a hard time, and maybe they haven't really been developed to fit the theme, or the license that they were just kind of mashed together. But I think, there's something, you're kind of in this very important or significant position as I was going to say it's not the gatekeepers, it's like the doormen of,
well, I know exactly what you're talking about. A lot of what we do are gateway games, right? And and to some extent, like the doormen are the gatekeepers to, like, ooh, what's behind the curtain? Oh my gosh, there's all this other amazing, like, look behind you, right? Where like your shelves are full of so much more beyond what the sort of the classics or the gateway stuff is. And, I have to really thank being immersed in the industry to have really allowed my opportunity to grow within my knowledge and play experience within the gaming space. Like you, I had the experience as a young kid to play D&D literally as it was launched. And, having a passion for theater in my high school and college days, it was like, I could see how those two things were connected, but became so unconnected because I wasn't actively playing D&D into college. But how it's like come full circle now from a passion and an interest level. But those early foundations of getting an opportunity to see some stuff. And I only got to see D&D as a kid because one of my good friends from elementary school, I think it was 5th grade. So yeah, 5th grade, good friend of mine's dad was a gamer. And he, like, his basement was dedicated to large tables full of like war games with all the little cardboard chits cut out. And I was just like, oh my God, like my mind didn't really understand how to comprehend what I was looking at. It was like when somebody sits down and looks at something so foreign, like a foreign language, or maybe even a spreadsheet, or a rule book that feels like there's just too much to get through. It's like looking at all these bits on the table, and for him, it's connecting to history, connected to an understanding of coordinating a team, or even just the dialogue and combating between friends. So my friend grew up with his dad being immersed in that world, and his dad is the one that turned him on to D&D. So it was like we had a connection to like the guys who were the ones who were around when Gen Con got founded, right? It's like that early group of 70s gamers who were finding out about each other through magazines and publications, and finding games, if there was a game store at that time that had any kind of selection, or sending away for games because they'd read about it in a magazine.
Mail order games. I remember looking at the catalogs, and like for me in the UK, it was looking at the Citadel Workshop or Dixon Miniatures, and looking at the skeletons and the goblins that you could buy for those tabletop war games, and building an army and going, that's like £60. Back in the early 80s, it's just like, nope, that's not going to happen.
Yeah. Love to, but I can't afford it.
Yeah. It's funny, before we go on, Aquastilus has a really interesting question, I think, because I think a lot of people love the idea of combining licenses, and everyone has their favorite license, and I've had my experience with licenses as well. They're not surefire things by any stretch. So I think it's a really interesting question, like how do you decide if a license is worth tackling?
Yeah, do folks come to you, Tony, or do you go to like license holders, and then is it just a matter of sort of like matching up the right thing with the right license, or like what's the process there?
So yes, we do both. So
you could just stop there and just go, yes.
Yes. Next. So let me step back a moment too to one thing that Rory said too. Like licensed games are sort of scratch a certain itch for people who've grown up playing what we call sort of the classics or gateway games, right? So because we're a partner of Hasbro, and we have been since our foundation because of the licensed versions of Monopoly games, I've had the great fortune of getting to go into their archives in Pawtucket, in East Longmeadow. And there are two different sets of archives. One is the historical archives of Hasbro produced product, and then another one is game archives over history. And the difference is very marked as far as theme and subject, but some of the same sort of grist is still there. Some of the same questions and challenges being worked out. It's just the themes are slightly different. But if we talk about sort of licensed games and look at some of what we do and kind of what Hasbro has done over the years, is Hasbro was paving the way of doing licensed games in the 70s and 80s with television shows, like the $6 Million Man board game or the A-Team board game. Now, if you go back to that time frame and look at what the gameplay was, it met the needs of the consumer they were going after. Many of those games would not hold up to the gamers that we see in a daily basis at the trade shows that we go to, or the people that we're playing a lot of games with around our game tables. But what it did do was it brought more people into playing games, right? So for us, when it comes to really evaluating licensing, or, is there a formula? There's a small team internally at our company whose job it is to build the preliminary line. And what that involves is two key things. One is, what are the game brands that we're currently actively licensing and working on? And what are the licenses that we currently have active? So that's sort of one side. And then the other side is, are there other game brands that we have a desire and interest, or that might make sense to expand their current footprint format, are their IP, more importantly, are their entertainment brands, pop culture brands, shows, movies, books, whatever, that have a fan base embedded in them, that the IP or the storytelling therein would really make a rich experience within a game setting. So two sides of the coin are, we're constantly ideating, throwing a lot of noodles at the wall. And the ones that stick, we sort of, we're constantly making lists and refining those lists. And then also we attend the licensing shows so that we get to meet with the current partners that we are, and a lot of those partners have new IP that they're constantly bringing into their fold. And so they're presenting a whole bunch of new stuff to us. But because we've been doing licensing, we started doing licensing, as we're talking about it now, in 1998. Warner Brothers really wanted to do a Batman and Robin Monopoly game to tie into their launch of the movie. So they went to Hasbro. Hasbro said, we love the idea. It's just really not going to move the needle for us. Go talk to these guys. These are our licensing partners. See if they would be interested. We were like, wow, that sounds pretty cool. Let's try it. And so we did. And essentially that opened up the door for us, right? It allowed us to see game design and development in the framework that we were using at that time completely differently. And we sort of dipped our toe in. And then with Warner Brothers, we dipped our toe in again with Wizard of Oz. And then we're like, wow, this works really well. We don't have to chase all these businesses in these cities and states. And we're going after, a community and an audience that's already inherent in that IP. What else has that? Sports has that. Maybe we should do a Monopoly game centered around the Super Bowl. And it was like, after we did those few games, it was just like pivoting. We totally pivoted and started going down the licensing. So since we've been doing that, to your question, Michael, the phone is essentially constantly ringing to our senior vice president of licensing, because we've been doing licensing for so long. They're like, we've got something you want. We've got something you want. And in a lot of cases, it's worth at least the discussion internally on that line planning team. And then that line planning team is a mix of departments within the company. It's game design and development, it's graphic design, it's marketing, it's new product development, it's sales, and it's licensing, so that there's, a lot of different voices at the table. It's a relatively small group, 6 or 7 of us. And then from there, it sort of goes back out to a little bit broader circle to include the more sales and marketing and the CEO, and to really evaluate those further questions, which is, what's the formula? If we are interested in going after something, we need to do some cost analysis if it would make sense. And if it's going to make sense, what are the pairings that we would do with it, right? And not everything's going to make sense. Sometimes we have the greatest idea and we execute, and for one reason or another, it just doesn't translate at retail. Or we're like, we're going to try this and we don't know. And then it just takes off. And sometimes there's no formulaic rationale for it. And sometimes there's rationale for it that was way out of our control.
It's funny hearing you talk. Just reminds me of, I think there's also something special in your combination, is that the game is also familiar to people. With Story Cubes, we went after what I would consider timeless, brands like Batman in the UK, Doctor Who being a multi-generational thing, Moomin in the likes of Japan and Europe, and it was very hard to get them to kind of connect, because people were like, well, what's the hot thing? Why aren't you going after the hot thing? And I was like, because I can't get the timing right for when that hits. And I've heard recently, essentially Star Wars is gone from mass at the moment, in a large degree, that just people are kind of burnt out on the merchandise aspect of it. But that, like, last year, even the year before that, seemed like a no-brainer. So if you were licensing something, and that's the timeline, is probably 2 years ago, and then bringing it out now, it's just like the timing is completely off. So but if you have something that is well, there's that other aspect. Like you've got a familiar IP, you've got I think a game
Familiar
system,
game.
but you also have to have the channel for it to go into as well. And how does that, like, are you always thinking we need this to work, or you're kind of aiming for it to work to some level at mass, or do you have different channels that you think about for those games that mightn't hit that top tier, but you've got like this is our second tier channel that we can go to with this?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely the channel distribution certainly makes a large influence in whatever we're evaluating. Our Hasbro branded products, we don't sell into mass. And so that's really never part of the equation or discussion. Unless, of course, there's a one-off that either Hasbro or the third-party IP initiates. Then it's like a one-off, right? It's like a feature shop about certain IP. Hasbro's not going to do the game. We've done the game. Everybody comes together to make the thing happen. But we're constantly discussing where certain IP resonates, where the customers, the fans are already shopping or already spending time around a particular IP. And one thing you mentioned, which is especially for us so true, is that, and why I said earlier that I think in many respects early on, and a large portion of our catalog still is licensed product more than it is gaming, because we're taking a very, very familiar gameplay pattern and game like Monopoly or Yahtzee or Clue. Now at this point, Codenames and Munchkin. And those, at least for the gaming community, those are really well known. I don't have to teach you how to play those. You already know how to play those. So when I partner it up, when we put an IP with it that you are hugely passionate about, there's no real teaching needed. I just need to find the fan and point them in the direction of the product, and then hopefully, they're like,
let them go.
Like, here's my money, right? Or it's a great gift. Like, I have a friend who's a huge Doctor Who fan. I got to get him that because I know they love it, and they don't need to learn how to play it. They already know how to play it.
I can just picture. Sorry.
I was going to say, so in many respects, those familiar game brand products are, for the most part, foundational from the gamer community. But if you translate that out to that broader community, like Hasbro was doing with their, approach to licensed games early on, it's we're ideally utilizing the fans and the communities within the third-party IP to bring them into the fold of the gaming community, right? So for us, it's been a challenge and a discussion, and part of the reason why we're still an amazing partner with Hasbro is because there's been that consistent ebb and flow of discussions. Like, well, we don't want the ops games to cannibalize the sales of the core product, but at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're bringing the game brand of just use Monopoly into the eyes and the tables of people who may not have normally wanted to play Monopoly. And so Monopoly is still now top of mind and still present. So across the board, we're continuously elevating brands that are familiar because we're partnering them up with an IP. And at the outset, I'm or family and friends or even gamers who have a passion for Naruto or My Hero Academia or Nightmare Before Christmas. If they see something that scratches that itch for them, they're going to be way more intrigued by it than if it was just the classic, right?
Yeah.
It's not just knock the classic, because we wouldn't have a foundation without that classic. The classic is crucial to that growth.
And I think that's what kind of excites me with what the OP is doing now. Like, because I suppose part of me would worry or assume that when it's Monopoly and the IP, people are buying it for the familiarity, and the experience kind of stops at that point, because it's like, that's familiar, and this is something I love, and that's enough at that point. Like, there's nothing new necessarily being added to the play experience for that person. Whereas, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when you've got something like Hogwarts Battle, or you've got like even a licensed Codenames, it's a game unlikely that the fan of that IP has played or experienced before. Now they're getting the sense of, I've like, this is a new this is a new experience to me. I'm enjoying this kind of like really easy to learn game, and it's a great mechanic. And I would imagine there's a better opportunity to introduce people to newer games and ignite that interest. Whereas with it being a familiar mechanic, say with Monopoly, it's quite easy for someone to go, yeah, I'm just playing it because it's a known thing. But I love that IP. It's like, it's the better version of Monopoly, but I'm not less necessarily looking for something beyond that. Like, has that been your experience, or have you any way of tracking that?
Well, in some instances, we are able to embellish the core game experience with some added game experience or gameplay. It more often pops up in games like Risk, where we can create a new map and or create new scenarios. Or then there's been some stuff within some of the Monopoly games we've done throughout the past, but the other games like Codenames or Munchkin or even Star Trek Panic that we did in the past and Hogwarts Battle, what we're really trying to do there is bring a gameplay experience or play experience to the fans of that, or the community of that, that are passionate about that IP, and give them an experience that ideally allows their understanding of what games or gaming can truly be. So I think in the last decade, we've really tried to push ourselves as a company and grow more into that space. And I think games like, Telestrations and Hogwarts Battle are two games that have really helped us as a company become more of a gaming company, because they, Telestrations still takes something very, very familiar, but executes it in a unique and playful way. That is a great opportunity to also then open the door for this company made this really cool game. What else do they do? And then as people go down that rabbit hole, there's, ideally a multitude of IP that they're fans of, and maybe even some games they may have heard about. And then with Hogwarts Battle, at the outset, the goal really was that there are millions of fans around the globe of Harry Potter that span from, like age 8 to 80 that grew up with those books and are consistently growing up with those books, right? Since it started as literature, there's new fans finding that storyline, that world annually. So when we decided to create the game around that IP, we really understood that many of the fans were probably going to be coming into the gaming experience for the first time. And when I say gaming, separate from the sort of classics or the gateway games that, many of us grew up with, like deck of cards, Uno, Yahtzee, Scrabble, Trivial Pursuit, Pictionary, like those really sort of core classics. So deck building, if you were to talk to somebody just walking in the game aisle at one of your local mass market stores and say, hey, have you ever played a deck building game? They're like, what is deck building? So for Harry Potter, Hogwarts Battle, what we wanted to do is we wanted to give the fans a truly rich experience that married up well with the IP, but allowed them to learn and grow into what that game system and game format was, that essentially and eventually will help them find and discover a whole multitude of new games.
So I'm curious, actually. So what was your pitch for Hogwarts Battle then? If you're trying to avoid those terms.
Like to customers, consumers? So we still do we still use deck building because deck building is at the foundation of what the game system is. And I think everybody has sort of finessed it a little bit differently, but at the core, Hogwarts Battle is a deck building game that allows you as a player to start like you're in the first year at Hogwarts, and you get to evolve through all 8 years that Harry and his friends go through Hogwarts. And by the end, you're having to battle in a similar manner all the same challenges that Harry and his cohort experienced. So it's like you're getting to relive the experience of going through school and learning and testing your knowledge of spells and such, and battling Death Eaters and dark arts, right? So I think it's more about talking about the love of the world of Harry Potter and tying it back to the essence of deck building, which is you start with a deck of cards, you spend those cards to acquire more cards and build your deck so you get to be a stronger wizard. So at the core, that's all you're doing. It's all the game really is, right? And yes, of course, there's nuance to it, but you learn that as you go. Game one is designed to let you win 95% of the time because we want you to have a good enough experience with the mechanics of it so that by the time you get to games 3 and 4, you're like, oh, now I understand why I made the choices I did. I need to make different choices sometimes.
Like Aqua stepping in with the thing making us all feel very old. The first Harry Potter film is 20 years old now.
Gosh.
We're already preaching remake territory. Screw you, Aqua. How dare you come in here and make us feel bad?
We're part of the crazy group that waited in line at midnight for book releases and film releases. Yeah, we have 2 girls that grew up with Harry Potter for sure. Who is Harry Potter?
Well, I think, without bringing Peter's comment up because it's quite long, he's definitely echoing, I think, what the suspicion is with games like kind of Harry Potter. It's bringing people into the store to buy that game, and then they're coming back to discover new things. And it's the thing is, it's fine if that's all people are playing. At least from my perspective, it's like they're getting a good game to play. And I think that's the key thing that you guys do really well is you're matching, even with the IP, you're not being lazy with it. Like you're making sure that there's a quality product there for people to play as well. Because I think we've seen we've all gotten hopeful about a game with an IP attached to it, and then you're just like, they just slapped it on.
Yeah, and I think since the core base of gamers or game players who are seeking more has gotten more sophisticated and their expectation has been raised so high that it's that much more important for those of us making games to ensure we put a game through the paces so that it can meet those needs of both the first time player as well as those of us who want to sit down and enjoy something to its depth. Like as Michael said at the start, it's like he's realizing Marvel Champions, there's so much gameplay there. He wants to go back to it. Like a really well developed and designed game really allows the player the experience to want to go back and make new choices to have a new and a deeper experience with it. And we don't always get it right. I mean, part of the development process, especially in licensed games, is so incredibly important because we all come to the table with this expectation of what our experience is going to be because of the IP. That if the gameplay doesn't deliver on that, it's like a letdown on 2 levels, right? But because we're also playing in a licensed or an IP world, we also have a contract that's got a finite amount of time to it with the potential for renewal, right? But we've got a finite amount of time. So we only want to spend so much time up front actually developing and designing so that we have time to print and manufacture and distribute with the hopes of, getting it, more than just a single production run. And so sometimes there are games which, we probably all can name a few of the licensed games out there that in essence, there was something there, but it just didn't quite have the development time that it probably needed to really push it over the hump. And then other games that are really well designed and developed that for one reason or another just didn't catch on. And they're great licensed immersion experiences, but they just, the fan base wasn't broad enough. The gameplay experience wasn't right match, something that just didn't allow it to stick around long enough. There's a number of games chatted about online and in BGG about, whatever happened to, why didn't that stick around longer? Or is anybody going to reprint that? I mean, Dune's a perfect example of that, right? Like the Dune game that is just now back out on the market. That's a sort of a remake and a re-envisioning of what that play experience can be, is really well executed.
Yeah, I mean, I remember interviewing Peter Olocka, one of the designers of that, like some 10 years ago, maybe even longer than that. And he was sure that Dune was never going to see the light of day again. Like it, and I briefly spoke to him again, like relatively recently, and he was still sort of like shocked and amazed that it was coming back, because he just thought that the license would never come up again, which is it's really, really interesting. Really interesting to sort of like think which ones work, which ones don't, what fires and what doesn't.
And it's kind of weird because there's certain ones that you would think are like that, timeless, but it's so there's actually a thing we had when we talk about story cubes, and I'm curious how this resonates with you, Tony. I think I realized there's certain IPs that people are happy to consume, but they don't want to actively engage in it. And the whole thing with Rory story cubes is there's an active engagement.
That's a good framework. Yeah.
Whereas you can buy the Batman hoodie or the Batman mug and show your kind of affinity to that thing. But what you're asking me to actually engage with it. And we realized that was a real challenge with the licensing for Rory story cubes. You needed an IP that people were like almost passionate storytellers and wanted to keep creating stories around it. And that was, I know it's coming in the future, but my biggest regret was like we tried so hard to get Harry Potter because we were like, this is just, my daughters were quite young and we were like, this is a perfect fit because people were really passionate in that world. But yeah, it's an interesting thing because I find some of those things are, you're buying it to consume it, and just you're happy to look at that visual version of a game, and that's slightly different from like taking it more into the role-playing space where you have to bring more to it. And I think that can kind of indicate where an IP may or may not work or be suitable for a game.
Yeah, I think you can boil it down to passive and active engagement, I guess. Like Tony, what's your thought on that?
That's a great way to frame it up. That's one of the things that we talk a lot about in our line development process is there can be a super, super deep community support for an IP, but they want to consume it as just the graphic novel. They don't want any of the ancillary stuff. They don't even want t-shirts. They just want the graphic novel, right? So there's a lot of great fans out there of a lot of great stuff, but it just doesn't all translate to what we do. It just doesn't, even though there's an active community there, right? Passionate community. It's just more of a passive when it comes to purchasing, right? Like one of the things that we evaluate a lot, and then a lot of license holders come to us with, are TV shows that have been on for 5+ years. Because there's clearly a fan base, passionate viewership that's taking place and engagement on a weekly, or whether it's binging, in some of the new format, but the weekly basis for multiple years in a row. So you would think naturally, well, there's a game in there, right? Even at least a Monopoly game or a Yahtzee game. It's like, okay, there probably is, but are those fans actively going out and purchasing other things? Is there a offering of other things outside of just a t-shirt or a coffee mug for said property, whatever the property is. And so that's something that we do talk an awful lot about, because there's way more things that we are all fans of than would actually translate well to the table on a gameplay experience level, whether it's a very light social experience or a little more deep storytelling, experiential gameplay experience. And I mean, even some of the superhero stuff, right? And you mentioned Star Wars. Like Star Wars, I think we got pretty lucky in the last decade to have a number of really amazing Star Wars games come out that were scratching an itch that those of us who grew up with the original Star Wars were like, oh my God, this is the game I really wanted to play when I was a kid. And now I get to play it because I have the money to buy it and play it. You know, and there's a new digital video game on its way that's going to allow us to be, you know, sitting in the cockpit of a TIE fighter or an X-Wing and be able to really immerse ourselves in that world. But there's also then this either, as you said, fatigue in the marketplace, or this newer fan base that has no desire to step over that line and immerse themselves in the world. They have a great relationship with it and on an experiential level as a fan, and as a they want to experience the story. They don't want to immerse themselves in the story through play.
I just thought of something. I kind of do this every episode. Free pitch, and I'll buy it, even if you just make the one copy of it. Ms. Marvel Monopoly, set in New Jersey.
What are we going to... Okay, I always have a problem with stuff like this. What are we going to be buying?
You're buying all the locations in New Jersey that
who would want to buy anything
the comedy
in New Jersey,
club,
for one thing?
the record store, her parents' apartment, her apartment. Yeah, like, so you can create the experience, right? You can find a way to make it fit. The question is, are fans? I'm a huge fan of Miss Marvel. Like, I've devoured it.
Yeah.
Are the people who are like me that are fans of the show going to want to buy a Monopoly game? I think Hasbro did a Miss Marvel game, or they talked about doing it, and you know, there's definitely the right audience. It's going to be Miss Marvel fans, Monopoly fans, the crossover fans, the ones who will actively buy, right? It's like we're constantly doing this with all of our internal discussions. Like, where's the Venn diagram overlap of all these things? And is that sweet spot large enough for all of us to really make the effort to, back to the original question here, to make the financial commitment that it takes to make these happen? Because at the end of the day, for us to work with Harry Potter, we pay Warner Brothers a royalty. We pay, if we do a co-brand like we did with Codenames, we pay Czech Games Edition and Warner Brothers a royalty. And I think,
and these are not insignificant amounts of money either. You know, we're talking about an industry where margins are thin at the best of times. So.
And
when you're working with licensed things, it's going to be tough making money at the best of times. Yeah.
And so there may be some licenses and game pairings that make all the sense in the world, but just the numbers just don't work for anybody to make any money, right? So,
they should probably start with Ms. Marvel Stretch Armstrong first, and take it from there.
Terrible. We've got a question from Mike in the chat who says, do you follow what's in movie production? And I would also include like TV and stuff in there as well to help judge upcoming trends. Like, so how far ahead do you work, Tony?
So we are constantly looking at future movie and television production plans as far best and as deep as access as we can get. You know, many of us, even in this industry, are also at the mercy of what's been reported. Sometimes if we're working with an existing partner, we get invited to their summits and they lay out what their plans are for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So actually, I'd say we do, and we have to pay attention because for some of the games we're actively working on, or some of the licenses we're actively working on and or wanting to be working with, that may influence our decision one way or another. And I think one perfect example of this is that our game Thanos Rising, we got to see on our game development side and our licensing side, like a very small handful, we're talking like 2 or 3 people, got to see laid out in sort of a very rough storyboard arc of what the Marvel Cinematic Universe was going to do well before it actually executed. And we'd already been in talks and working on some other Marvel product. And so we're like, well, this makes sense to do this product because of what's coming. And because of what's coming makes sense to do the other thing that we wanted to do. So we have to be able to plan on that. And then sometimes that then essentially narrows down how much more we can take on because we know we're already planning. So to tie it back to the question is, yes, of course we do. And we then plan. So like right now we're beginning to look at and talk about games for 2023. Like that's how far we have to plan in advance. And Rory mentioned this earlier where he said, it's so hard to time to be on shelf when things are hot. Like that is the most ideal thing that any of us could ever do, right? And it's not it's not rocket science, but it's also not as easy as it may seem. And there are oftentimes things that are going on in the entertainment sphere. I use that term broadly because it can span from literature to film and everything in between that are going to be, peaking at a certain point. That would be great to tie in with that. But for one reason or another, it also may not make sense to try and bring an immersive experience to that. And on the flip side, it's like, are we too early for something? Is it just getting its stride? Where will it be in 2 or 3 years? Like if we're planning for 23 and there's a show that's just been launched this year, is it still going to be hot? Is it still going to be the thing that people are going to be talking about? Is it still going to be relevant? It's so challenging.
And I think on top of that, and just kind of based on my own experience as well, when you go to licensing shows, you've got people pitching their thing, and I'm going to kind of point at Warner Brothers in terms of like the output can be a dud sometimes from a consumer perspective, but like 2 years earlier, they're telling you this is like the most amazing, groundbreaking thing ever. Like, and it's quite easy to get caught in it's like, oh my God, you've been given a glimpse at, some future potential thing. And I imagine that's hard as well, because you're having to kind of not get caught up in the hype of what they're pitching and really use your guidelines for deciding what to go forward.
There must be so many things where you think it's an absolute shoe-in. There is no way on earth this could fall. And then Justice League happens, and it's like, okay, we were thinking that was going to be like, a $1 billion movie, and it just dies on its butt. It's so strange. But then I think another thing you said a couple of minutes ago, the idea of like, is this show going to be hot in a couple of years' time? I think we've seen like an absolute slew of like Walking Dead games over the past few years, for example, and that show is by no means as hot as it was in its first couple of seasons. It's on season like 7, 8 now, I think.
I think it's on 10.
10? Jeez, I
and there are 2 offshoot shows.
Oh God, yeah. But there are still announcements of, hey, we've got a new Walking Dead game coming. It's just like, is there really that much of that thing you mentioned, that Venn diagram of people who care enough about it to buy this game to actually go and pick it up? And I find it absolutely wild. I've never been to a licensing show. I would love to go to one day just to sort of see what the experience is like. This isn't me just like dropping hints, Rory. It's like it's just a thing I've wanted to check out at some point.
Have you been to Toy Fair?
I've been to New York Toy Fair, but we were very much stuck in one hall for the whole extravaganza.
So licensing show is like that, right? But it's the IP holders that are selling their IP as opposed to the publishers selling their games. It's a very similar feel. There's probably a little more money spent on what you're seeing and looking at, because you got to draw the attention, because their level of investment in their product is much deeper and much more expensive.
So we're not talking like a 10 by 10 with like, a couple of banners and that's it.
No, I haven't. Licensing show is not my realm, so I haven't even been. I've just, from the discussions from my colleagues who go and seeing some video interviews and photos of the space. But I've been to other shows very similar to it that are where the publisher isn't there. It's another aspect of a business, and I think it is interesting to look at it from that perspective. Is like the level of investment that a production team on movie house or film studio or television production has to pour into a new production the bar is so steep that, of course, from a sales perspective, it has to be the most highly anticipated huge success potential. Otherwise, they wouldn't be spending their time and money on it, right? I think if we flip it too, for the big three, Mattel, Hasbro, and Spin Master, for them to go after and put a game on the mass market shelf, it's very similar. They're spending huge amounts of time, money, and effort to market those games with the hopes that they become hugely successful, at least for 1 or 2 seasons, and hopefully a few of those catch on to become evergreens. But they're not going to spend the time and money if they don't have that same huge hope and expectation for it.
So Jay Foolsguard has an interesting question in terms of, is there other ways to reach non-gamers other than through licenses? I would have my ideas on that. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, so at the core of it all bundles down to marketing and what it is you think is marketing, right? The best way to reach non-gamers is with brand ambassadorship. And true brand ambassadorship is somebody who has played your game, who loves it so much they want to tell their friends and family about it. And that's not something that you've necessarily paid somebody to do for you. It's just that their experience was so incredibly deep and wonderful that they can't help but want to share that. So that, first and foremost, is probably the most effective and oftentimes unpaid marketing, right? I mean, our game Telestrations essentially is like a case study all about that. When we launched that game for the first time in a public trade show was Gen Con, and actually Chicago Toy and Game Fair and Gen Con all within a single year of each other. But at Gen Con, this was our first time exhibiting at Gen Con, and there were 2 of us. We had a relatively small booth in comparison, and we had these huge hopes, right? Huge hopes. And then we get there, we're like, oh my gosh, we might be fish out of water here. and it was like literally game after game after game of demoing. And I think we sold under 10 copies that first day. And we're like, what are we going to do? This is horrible. But you know what? It's literally exactly what I was just saying. You get somebody to fall in love with the experience that they have playing a game, they're going to bring their friends to the table to play that game. So we sold 7, 10 copies, whatever it was that first day. The next day, we had more people coming to the booth because they had played the game the night before. The next day, it was the same thing. So that groundswell just kept growing. And any of us who make games, whether it's with an IP or a theme, hope that the play experience is so wonderful that they're bringing it to their family and friends. So that's probably first and foremost, the first level of ground level marketing. And the only way you're actually paying for that directly is if you're doing so at a trade show and you're demoing and demoing and demoing, right? Then there's just the classic marketing where you're, Facebook ads, Instagram ads, Google ads. brand ambassadors that are paid, or influencers that are paid, or traditional marketing where you're spending money to put a banner ad up on Board Game Geek or ICV2, or a print ad in one of the industry publications, or even in a publications that's industry adjacent. Like there's a magazine for video game fans. Well, maybe an ad for a Halo Risk game would be appropriate to throw in there, because huge fan base of Halo fans are flipping through this magazine on a monthly basis. If they have no idea that there's a Halo monopoly, and then they see it, they're like, oh my God, this is awesome. I know how to play Risk. I'm a huge Halo fan. I got to have that.
Mhm.
So there's a way to bring non-necessarily tabletop gamers into the fold in traditional methods, but outside or adjacently to what it is you're doing. And then I think there's also just the big media spend. I think those big three definitely do more of that big spend to get non-gamers to try, their gaming stuff. Again, their market share is more targeted at the mass shopper, which is generally a more classically non-gamer, right? It's not to say that there aren't gamers that also shop at those stores and pick up some games there, but it's more classically the parents who are looking to get something to entertain the kids or entertain the family for an evening or a weekend, as opposed to, I got to go to this store because I know I can get this specific game at this specific store.
Random aside, is somebody snoring? It's not my cat. My cats are both outside.
I do have a dog that's asleep here. She may be snoring because she's been known to snore.
I don't know. I was just trying to work out who it was. It's just like, it's either one of Rory's kids or it's somewhere at Tony's house.
Let me just give her a little nudge with my foot here.
Fine. There's like a sawing sound happening.
That's so funny. I can't hear it because I've got the noise canceling headphones.
Okay.
Yeah, normally it would be Kira, like one of my cats, but no, I specifically made her stay out there today. Yeah. So it's like,
so like in terms of the question, is there other ways to reach non-gamers? Because it's to do with non-gamers, I'm going to say it's one of the best ways, and I suppose the reason why I say that, I think like a lot of life is about risk mitigation. And ease, so the things we engage with we kind of go for the familiar because our brains don't have to work too hard to figure it out. We have extensive conversations, Michael, about this, about rule books, and we can say the games
barrier to entry. Yeah,
the games that get played. For me, one of the reasons why Monopoly is always coming up is because you've probably been taught it by somebody else. Like rarely. It's like that weird thing of like, who's read the rule book? Everyone's been kind of taught it. And with, I think one of the things with a licensed game, then the great thing it does is it has that familiarity, which is like, I recognize that thing. And therefore I'm kind of bought into it because of that factor. So I think we used to talk about it when we were doing kind of change work, is you want to kind of like create a little wedge. So you open the door to someone for them to step in through something kind of that's recognizable or familiar. And that's where I think the licenses can be quite powerful. And I think that there's a lot of potential within the kind of broader world of gaming for, putting energy into creating really good combinations of license and gameplay, like you're saying with Hogwarts Battle, and like using a game like Codenames that is on its own is an amazing game in its own right, and finding more of those modern classics and combining them with IPs, I think has a huge amount of potential, which gets me excited because then I can happily recommend you should check out this game because I know the core of the game is fun and I know you'll love the IP that's associated with it as well.
Yeah.
So I do think it's quite a powerful way. And I can't actually think of anything that would be better to get non-gamers into games.
Yeah, I think, back to the comment about marketing, is having an IP on a game just in and of itself is a form of marketing because of that familiarity piece. It's almost like it's a safety net or a security blanket. Like, oh, I love that. I'm drawn to that. I'm going to pick it up. Ooh, what's this? It's like that familiarity creates a bridge that wasn't there before. So if you take a game like Hogwarts Battle and you say, this is wizard deck building, it's like, yeah, wizard deck building, whatever. But if it's Harry Potter, it's like, oh, Harry Potter may be a wizard, but I'm not calling it a wizard. I'm calling it Harry Potter, and I have a connection to Harry, so I'm going to be drawn into it. So that level of familiarity builds that bridge in a way that I think themes may do very well for the gamer community, but may have a harder time doing with the general audience, the non-gamer community, with some exceptions, right? There are definitely some exceptions that I think have done a very good job of taking their theme and crossing out to a broader audience, but that also come from a lot of those rippling brand ambassadors, right? I mean, the fact that you can go here in the US market, go into Target, and you can find Catan, Carcassonne, and Ticket to Ride as staples now at that store speaks volumes to the fact that there have been enough of us dropping those pebbles of enjoyment in the pond, so that more people are being able to experience accessibility to those types of games. And then once there, they see some of the other licensed stuff, and then like, ooh, I didn't know there was a game for this. I love this.
And that's where I think like a license can be a more certain route. It's no guarantee of success, but you can kind of go, well, there's a baseline of marketing I'm going to get on the back of this. In terms of the champion or kind of ambassador, I think, Michael, we saw that amazingly in action with the Mind when we were at Gamma 3 years ago. Was it 3 years ago?
Must be longer. It's longer than 2 for sure.
When every time we looked at Eric Martin, he was playing the Mind and playing it with anybody who would play it with him.
It was like this gloriously joyous black hole of, please come and play this. I need to show you it. And got that.
I think
such a cheerleader.
I don't know if I played it with him, but I do recall him being a ambassador for it because it was such a unique experience.
Yeah, it was really funny because we were like having meetings out in the kind of the cafe area, and every time we turn around, he's standing at the table playing the Mind. I was just like, that game is going to be big because people look to him for
guidance and support and insight. Yeah.
And
it's interesting. There are definitely games. I'm going to try and bring this around for you, Rory. There are games out there that are completely different than the norm, and the play experience is so unique, that have nothing to do with an IP or necessarily even the gameplay, but what at the core the game is trying to deliver. So my mom, she would not call herself a gamer by any stretch of the imagination. She hates competitive games. She wants to play games where we're all working together. Like, she's even tried to play Monopoly with the girls when they were young, where instead of charging people rent, like, well, let's build up these houses all together, right? Like, she really wanted to, she wanted to bring the essence of who she was to the table, right? So I think there are games that are, and more so probably now more than ever, that are using the platform of tabletop gaming to bring people into the fold that want to have a much different kind of experience of play. There are these 2 women that made this amazing game, and they pitched to us, and I fell in love with the game experience, and I fell in love with them because of their passion for the game. And I'm one of those ambassadors for the game. We're not publishing it. I'm a total ambassador for it because I know the experience that it can create at the table. And it's this game called Sparked. And it's the idea of what sparks you, right? Like, and the framework of the game is you spin a spinner, it lands on a category, you choose a category card. Sometimes the question is just for you to answer. Sometimes it's a quiet answer that everybody at the table does. Sometimes it's an experience that everybody taps into and shares collectively. And the game is all about getting to know each other better. It has nothing to do with I won or we won together. It's like, let's connect at a deeper level and get to know each other a little better. And it's such a unique, like, I'm getting literally goosebumps talking about it because I've seen the game in action. Like, people who would normally not sit at a table together and have a deep conversation are suddenly having a deep conversation in the midst of play. Like, you wouldn't believe. And it's the type of game that, given the right kind of platform and the right kind of marketing, back to that marketing question, how does a game like that really get an opportunity to see the light of day so that it has the opportunity to reach more people? And it's tough because they're literally independently publishing and selling it. And thankfully they've gotten some folks in some of the circles to recognize the game. And so they're beginning to make some of the rippling out there, but it's like, there are other games, like even your game Holding On, like that's not your typical type of play experience, because of what's underneath there that's going on, the discussion and the conversation that's creating is so incredibly different than what most, especially non-gamers, would consider a game.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I'm conscious of time, and I want to check. Are you okay for and to talk for a little bit longer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me just check the calendar here. I think I'm good. I don't think I have anything until. Yeah, I'm good. I can spend a little more time.
Because and just to kind of say to everyone who's watching, originally I was going to talk to Tony about kind of mindfulness in games, and I went, well, we'll touch on the OP and licensing for 10, 15 minutes before we dig into it.
But that's an hour and a half later.
Yeah, never happens.
So I was kind of debating, do I just keep this for a completely separate conversation? But there's something I kind of wanted to say in response to what you've said and that we've experienced, and kind of dig into that idea of different kind of game or play experiences. So I've seen Sparked and haven't had the chance to play it. I love what it does, and then there's what I would consider the Irish part of me that is no one's gonna play that. In terms of actually, sorry, the thing in my head was that is such a West Coast game, in terms of hey everybody, let's connect and share our feelings with each other, and everyone is like, oh my god, that's the worst time together ever. But if the game can facilitate it, that's the magic of it. That's what I think, that idea of you get the wedge in, where you open up the possibility for it, but you have to.
Story Cubes is very similar to that, man. I mean, many people won't see it as a game, right? It's an activity you're doing. You're like, there's this whole. You're right, and in fact, when discussed with certain circles, a game like those, it's that's not even a game. Can't even really consider that. Where are we going to sell it? Who's going to be the buyer? It's it's really, at the end of the day, there are those business decisions that certainly need to be made. On the flip side, tying it back to the marketing, there are channels of people that are looking for ways and tools, more importantly, tools to help facilitate that type of stuff, right? And if there's something that can be offered and utilized in a more of a playful setting to help trigger or kick things off, oh my gosh, so amazing.
And I'm conscious this isn't getting into the mindfulness aspect, but I think it's a really relevant thing. With we had this with the Extraordinaires Design Studio. That was the follow-up to Rory Stray Cubes, and we were it's a game. It's more of a playful experience. But what we realized, there was an audience for it, but we didn't have easy access to that channel, and we'd have to work really, really hard. And I think that's one of the challenges within the game industry, the traditional tabletop game industry, is people are selling through their channels and not really looking outside to that wider audience. And how do you reach it? We've spent the last year in particular really thinking hard about that, and how do we broaden that out, because there's so many other people out there ready to discover games because they're buying Star Wars Monopoly and those other titles. But I think the challenge that is when you bring something that isn't obviously a game, people might go, oh yeah, that's it's a great experience, but I don't have the channel for it because it's not going to go onto that retail shelf that I'm used to dealing with. And I think it's one of the challenges when you look at a game publisher, is that the the limit of what it is they're making puts them into a very tight niche, which can be easy because you can kind of optimize things to focus on that group. But you miss, and this brings us to the kind of mindfulness, it misses one of the key aspects of games, which is connection. Like, if you think about, well, we don't just make games, we create opportunities for connection and shared experiences together. Then it's suddenly like, oh, I don't have to just sell Settlers of Catan or a game with a win-lose outcome, or maybe stretch to a co-op game. Like, I can start to offer other experiences that broaden that out a little bit. And I think there's like a great opportunity, and I think we've seen it with some of the certain game companies that focus on like female gamers, that they're just designing a game strictly for that audience, and the wider audience will be like, I've no interest in that, but they're being really effective in creating a shared play experience for that target audience. And I think we're going to see more and more of that coming out, where people blur the lines as to what, are we playing a game? Are we having time together? And does it really matter? And hopefully that's how Sparked will find its way out. But I don't think it's going to happen within, unfortunately, the kind of traditional gaming audience. And part of the reason why StoryCube succeeded is because I didn't have that knowledge at the time. I didn't know any. Myself and Anita didn't know any better. We were just like, we know people like playing this game because they're buying it off our website. We just went to what were the obvious places to sell it, which were, game shows, and trade fairs. But like that, we did have our fair share of people go, that's not a game. And you go, that's fine. Yeah. But there's lots of people playing it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, just the whole idea of mindfulness and mindset. Mindfulness and mindset are related, and yet expressed quite a bit differently in the gaming space. I think you can have the mindset that games have to have a winner and a loser, or you can have a mindset that it is a shared experience, regardless if it's a co-op game, experience game, or a competitive game. And then mindfulness is all about how it is you're playing that game, right? Who you're playing the game with. What are the conversations that you're having? How are you each approaching the game? And I think some of the games that maybe even facilitate that with kind of a strange angle at it are the social deception games, social deduction games, because there's a sense of everyone is in the mindset like that we're playing this game where somebody or multiple people in this group are going to be lying to us. Like, they know that outright. And it may be me. You don't know. Maybe me. But the mindfulness aspect has to play a part of it, is because you need to be very mindful how it is you engage with people in that environment. So then you take that out of the framework of those types of games, and just mindfulness in general in gaming is, some of it is really all about who is at your gaming table, right? I think some of the conversations that games like Story Cubes or Sparked or Holding On can create can come around the table while playing something like Hogwarts Battle or Marvel Champions, right? It's because of who it is you're playing with and that shared experience. And I think one of the things, to tie it back to that earlier comment about brand ambassadors, is that if you have deep and meaningful conversations while you're playing a particular game, you're going to lock that in and associate it with that game to the point where you're like, I had such a good time playing this game with this group of friends. I'm going to see if I can share it with this other group of friends because I really like them. And I know I have deep and meaningful connections with them, and see what it can help facilitate. And the game at that point, it may be the facilitator of getting together and connecting, but then you're also sharing and playing the game in a much more mindful way, because you know the circle of which you're playing with. And at an event such as like Gen Con or Essen, where you may be walking into a demo or walking to sit down at a table where they need some more players, it's going to be different because you may be playing a game with somebody you don't know.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean you can't still have those deep and meaningful connections because you are still having a shared experience.
Uh-huh.
And I think there's a lot of like it's a whole other thing of almost like addiction behavior going on with that as well. Like the idea of it's a what do they call it? Chasing the not is it chasing the dragon?
That's about heroin.
Yeah, but but you're trying to recapture an experience. Like
Yes.
Okay, recapture the past glory, but like
Yeah.
every time
Yeah.
it's that little bit more difficult. Okay, yeah.
and I think that happens a lot with games, and particularly games that you buy at conventions, because
Oh, yes.
it's a heightened space,
Heightened state. Yeah.
you know. And we've done that. We've sat down at Essen together and played games, and we're all like laughing manically because we're completely exhausted. And then you play the and then you play the game again. You play the game again, and you're like, that wasn't
Why
as
do we
fun
like
as that. And you're trying to get other people to play it, and you're like, no, but this is really good. And then you have to go, oh, hang on, was it just the people I was with back then? But there was something you were saying about in terms of that kind of mindfulness and the games we're playing and what they do, like the win-lose condition. I think for me, the challenge with a lot of games is they boil down to mathematical decisions. And there's always someone who will try to figure out how to turn it into that.
Game
and
that
I think
quickly. Yeah.
yeah. And I think the thing I'm most trying to do is like all I can do is slow that process down. It's like because I don't think you can take it away unless you know, because even with a role-playing game, it's the closest thing to creating an experience for people. But there's still like, well, how do I know whether I succeeded or not? Because it's not sufficient to just agree that we achieved it. So there's some mechanical element, and then eventually the game gets boiled down to just the mechanical elements. And I think that's what makes it hard to bring in so many of those other aspects that we talk about in terms of, what games could do when we're sitting around the table together. That opportunity for conversation and reflection and shared experience are kind of like hamstrung a little bit by that aspect. And I suppose I'm curious, is there like, and Michael, with your kind of extensive knowledge as well, is there any games that you've seen that kind of slow down that process or keep you in that
experience,
different mental state? Yeah.
I don't know. It's almost like this weird. I guess could you describe it as like a flow state? I guess it's sort of like you just could get completely zoned in. You get completely centered.
It's close enough, I think. Where I mean, because flow state is the overlap between challenge and skill level.
Okay,
is that particular thing, but it's almost like the game. What we're talking about is the game creating this kind of like illusion that you get kind of drawn into, so that you're not really thinking about the mechanics of how I win.
Okay,
how I win.
Yeah.
What decision I need to make right now to ensure me more points than my opponents.
Yeah. Okay, I got you. So yeah, it's less of the flow state. It's more of the it's the I am in this world kind of thing. You know, I'm no longer thinking about the mechanisms. I'm thinking about the universe that I'm in. There've not been many, because for all the thing that I say about games are a very sort of like social thing for me. Yeah, they're also really hella mathy as well, because I'm just sort of like sitting here going, how the hell can I win this thing? I think it's weird because it's generally like a bigger game experiences that really sort of like put me into that phase, into that state. So say, for example, something like Twilight Imperium or Eclipse, like, these games that are quite large and epic anyway, but it's got to be said, it doesn't happen for extended periods of time, but there are also there are extended moments where, say, for example, I'm sat at the table and I have negotiated this hard-earned truce with another player or another couple of players, and all of a sudden, at the time when I think that it's just the right time for me to do it, it's like the stabbing in the back, because that's very much not a mathematical decision. Yeah, it's probably going to help me to win, but it's also like thematically, I feel like the absolute king of bastards for having done that, and that makes me. It puts me into a universe beyond the game. Actually, Game of Thrones, the board game, is very, very good for getting you into that kind of thing, because especially if you're sat at the table with a few people who've already, who have played it or who are aware of the shows or have read the books, as long as they're coming into it with some level of awareness, where they know that this is a game where betrayal and backstabbing is integral, it is lovely. It pushes you out of the maths and into the world.
But I think that's the challenge is it's so much easier to push someone in that direction, like to say
when there's combat,
it's and winning and losing, and it's easier to do. It's how do you push them the other way to be caring, reflective, considerate. And there's two things. One, I think holding on, I would say, touches it. Like we've seen it happen. Does it sustain it over the full set of scenarios? People would question that. Others would say absolutely. But it's like you're working really hard to have players maintain that experience over that time. And then there's there's a value set that kind of looks at life. Like we're used to the I'll win at all costs, right? I'll win by following the rules. I'll win by being smart and optimizing my opportunity, and tough luck if you lose because you weren't really as smart as me in order to win that. And then there's like, we all win or we all lose, which is the co-op game. Looking at these kind of value systems, the one that we haven't really tapped into yet, which is win, but not at the cost of others, at the expense of others. And that's one of those kind of mechanics that I'm really interested in, because, how do you figure that out within a game? It's like, yes, you want to win, but if anyone else loses, then you've lost as well. I mean,
that is a very big egg to crack into, to be honest.
But the reason why I'm saying it is that's the world we're living in right now. Like that's the value, that's the kind of the way of thinking that's actually needed. Is it's not about like sacrificing everything and going back to a time of less, stuff or simpler times. It's a case of, no, we should be able to have a quality of life, but we shouldn't be willing to take it at the expense of others. And I think it's kind of really important within games that we actually start to explore that idea. The problem with all of these things is we're kind of metagaming it. So as long as you tell someone, here's the win condition of the game, they're like, okay, this is what I need to do, which, and it's like in economics, this idea of the kind of rational person. It's complete bull. Like that doesn't exist. There's emotions and drives and survival instincts that cause us to be less than optimal in our thinking, and yet games fail to capture that. And that's, I think, if games can explore that concept more, we're bringing a bit more of humanity into the gameplay, and not just the kind of I think the mathematical mind. Sorry, I didn't mean to rant like that for so long. It's just the things kind of linked together.
I mean, I would like, we mentioned the game earlier, but the mind definitely sort of like also puts you in that kind of like it's not winning at the expense of everybody else. It's very much a collective victory. But
it really forces you to slow down to connect with the subtleties of communication.
Yeah. And it does it very, very beautifully. Christ, I can't wait till we actually get to start sitting around a table and playing games again. Just that might well be one of the first ones I break out again, because like it's been a very long time. So now we must commune by placing our hands upon the table at one more time.
Right.
But I think one of the really nice things about that game actually is the sense of ritual that it creates.
Yeah.
And again, coming from other work and in terms of the mindfulness, like before having a meeting, ideally you have a check-in with people just to gauge, it's kind of why I asked that question whenever we have our weekly meetings. I don't jump straight into what's going on. It's like, where's everyone at? Okay, because it gives you a chance to kind of process that stuff and then be present for the conversation that's actually going to happen. And I love how the mind does that. And I think for me, that's an exciting thing about games, about giving people these experiences of, that was kind of special. I want that experience. It's not the sense of victory, but actually that moment when we all put our hands down and just kind of breathed together before we started, that was something special. And I think there's lots more opportunity within games to do that.
Agreed.
So I am watching the clock. Is because we could keep talking about this topic for ages. Tony, before we wrap up, is there anything coming up from the OP that we should be excited about, or stuff you're personally doing, like maybe outdoor gigs that we should be paying attention to?
So I'd say one game that I know we're collectively excited about at the Op, finally getting released, is Quests of Yore, Barley's Edition, which is based off of the game that is set up in the film Onward. And this is a passion project for the production and film team from Onward, as well as by the team here at the Op. And it's also kind of designed in a similar fashion to Hogwarts Battle, where it's trying to find a way to bring those gamers and or families that may not be familiar with RPG to the table to learn what an RPG is and how to play it and how to do it, and then to walk you through sort of a trial and a setup of one, and then you've got a multitude of adventures to go out on. So that game is just been I think just been shipping, and so that's one thing for sure that we're super excited. That was supposed to have come out last year, and then we had some writing challenges and some production challenges, so that one got pushed out to this year. So we're very excited about that. We're also working on a couple of projects that I can't quite talk about yet that we are absolutely over the moon thrilled with.
No one's listening, Tony. It's fine. It's just us.
Okay. It's just us kids here, right? One's a game that actually both games are game systems that we designed in-house. One is a standalone game and one's partnered up with an IP. So we're very, very excited about both of those. And I don't know if everybody is aware, but the Intellivision Amico is getting rebranded and relaunched. It was supposed to launch last year in October, but because of production challenges and COVID, they had to push it out. So it's going to be coming out in October of this year. We have a couple of our games that were announced that are going to be on that system. So you'll be able to play both Blank Slate and Telestrations on the Amico, which is going to be so exciting because, it's got the ability to, out of the box, you've got two controllers, but they have an app that you can put on your phones that looks and experiences just like the controller. And because it's already a touch screen and you've got a visual screen, it's going to look and feel just like the controller. So I'm very excited about both of those experiences. And then on a personal level, we have some very exciting things happening in our lives. Our oldest daughter is expecting her first baby. So surprisingly enough, yes, I am actually old enough to have a granddaughter on the way. But one of the things that some of you may know about me personally is that I absolutely love seeing live music. And so we had a multitude of concerts that we had planned for last year that unfortunately, because of lockdown, we had to cancel. On the flip side, the silver lining was we live in a cul-de-sac here in our neighborhood. And so there's 9 homes, and one of our multiple neighbors are musicians, but one of the neighbors had a gig that first week of March, which is actually next week, that got canceled because of COVID and lockdown. And he's like, I still want to play, so I'm going to pull my stuff out into the driveway and have a little concert in the cul-de-sac if anybody wants to join me. So, all 9 families showed up, and it was so much fun. We're like, hey, can we do this again next week? So we've been going every Saturday in our cul-de-sac with live music. And I think only one Saturday was missed because of weather. Every week has been some form of music.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've also had shows outside of the Saturdays for birthdays and anniversaries or holidays. In fact, we're having a St. Patty's Day celebration next week, Wednesday, so we're pretty excited about that. And then we've had some guest musicians come in. We have a guest musician coming in this Saturday, so it's been quite thrilling. And I have been able to set up my phone to Facebook Live most of these. So for those friends and family who are afar that want a little respite during their day or want to tune in live, the shows, if you will, are being broadcast out. And so it's been a great way for my wife and I, who love live music, to stay connected to something that is so passionate and dear to us, and at the same time connect deeper with our community of friends and family in our cul-de-sac here. So we've become like a neighborhood pod to some extent, even though we're all still, socially distanced and what have you. There's been like 6 people in the cul-de-sac so far that have gotten vaccinated because they're a little older in age, so they've got that earlier access. So that's some of the stuff coming up.
Cool. And I mean, I will say to anyone watching, if you don't have Telestrations, it is a game you really ought to have in your game library, especially if you're talking about that, playing with non-gamers or introducing people to how fun games can be. It's just such a great laugh playing it with people. Daughter's one of her favorite games. And I think that's how we got to know each other, actually, at Shy Tag.
I think so. Yeah.
Back in the day.
Way back in the day.
Yeah. Champions.
Yeah.
Very, very good.
Yeah. And I think one of the great things about that game too, Rory, is that it's a simultaneous play game, which basically means there's no downtime. You're always doing something on everyone's turn because everyone's playing at the same time. And it's not just one story going around or one book going around. It's everyone's got one.
Yeah.
So the payoff, the reveal, or that experience at the end is magical because you've done something in every single one of those. So,
but again, and I think as well that it's the pitch, like it's essentially, a visual Chinese whispers.
Yes.
That's that other thing for bringing people into gaming is you're presenting something that's familiar with a twist on it.
Yeah.
Cool. Michael, what are we up to?
What are we up to? Well, we are going to be back on Friday, of course, where we'll be playing a little bit more Prism Arena. I think would be quite good. A little bit more testing, mixing the new class and the old again, because that's always some interesting stuff. Next Wednesday, we'll be back again with another Hub Games Hangout, of course, this time with Henri Keramac and the one, the only, the Blank Meister, I think we should probably call him, Rob Barrett, who is a friend of ours who has just made it's just the worst, but it's also the best version of Blank ever.
He's made Frankenstein blank, like it.
Oh yeah,
Blankenstein.
He's got some Monopoly components, doesn't he, in the game?
He's got so many different absolute horror shows, which I'm entirely here for. I played a very early version of it, and it was an absolute mess then, but still stands up in a glorious, glorious way. The fact that you can score 4 or 5 different types of points in 9 or 10 different ways is just terrifying. But we're going to have the original designer of the game, who's going to sort of look on aghast as Rob sort of goes through all of his glorious changes that he's made to it. And that'll be happening next Wednesday. Yeah. What do you mean? I will not be surprised if Henri sort of like hangs up the call halfway through in like utter disrespect of his game.
I never meant for this to happen.
Oh, but it will be glorious and victorious.
I am looking forward to it.
It's going to be good times. Also, I just jumped on the Ops Twitter just to grab it so we can promote it. So, of course, if you want to go follow the team over there, you can find them at the Op Games. And I notice Care Bears Monopoly. So
yeah,
I should probably inform.
Oh, we've got some other really fun monopolies coming down the pike this year too.
Are we allowed to know any of them?
Is that?
Are you allowed to know any of them?
Am I allowed to let him out? Is that what he said?
Yeah.
No, I can't. I can't before the team says it's okay.
Okay. I will allow secrets. That's all good. But no, it's absolutely fantastic to have you on, Tony. We truly appreciate it, of course.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
It's always just a good excuse to catch up with people.
Give my love to Anita and the girls.
I will indeed. Likewise.
Real pleasure to hang out with you guys. Look forward to doing it again somewhere down the road. And hopefully in person, maybe in October.
That'd be nice. One day.
It's going to happen.
We'll see. All right, well, folks, thank you very much as well for joining us live on this glorious rainy Wednesday night. We will back again, like I said, on Friday. For now, though, have an awesome rest of your evening, day, morning, wherever, depending on where you are in the world. And this, as always, gentlemen, is where we wave goodbye. Farewell, all.